The neighbors see Marta Solberg on her knees in the frozen dirt, and they stop their wagons to stare. It is October 1903 in northern Montana, where the sky runs flat to the horizon and the wind never rests. Frost has already silvered the fence posts, twice killing the garden with a thin crust of ice that melts by noon. By January, the ice will be an inch thick on the inside of the cabin walls. Everyone knows this. They build with timber frames, chinked logs, and banked sod. The essential tools of survival in the Cutbank Creek Valley. Marta understands survival. She has weathered 4 winters already, each more brutal than the last. On this claim, last winter nearly killed young Thomas when the wall chinking blew out during a sub-zero February gale. She buried Lars in '99, raising 3 children on what 40 acres and her own hands could provide. Marta is 38, broad-shouldered, with a quiet strength and a mind that is constantly working. Her mind has decided to do something radical. Tear up the entire wooden floor of her cabin. She rips out the boards, stacking them aside, then begins digging deep into the earth below. She digs 2 feet down, then 3, creating a massive excavation inside her home. Neighbors Halvorsen, the Pritchards, and Mrs. Dunbar watch from the fence, baffled by her actions. Halvorsen calls out bluntly, asking if she is digging her own grave in the cabin floor. The Pritchard boys laugh while Mrs. Dunbar remains silent, clearly disapproving of Marta's strange work. Without looking up, Marta tells Eric to return in February's Fortablo cold to see her work. No one visits in February by choice, but the brutal winter will inevitably arrive for them. All something is coming that none of them yet understand. It will test every wall and chimney in Cutbank Creek. It will separate those who built wisely from the rest. Marta is betting everything on an idea. No one believes she has been thinking about this since Thomas nearly froze her father. Built using heat-rising Norse principles in Norway, she and Lars arrived in 1895 with immigrant determination. Lars wanted to build American and prove they belonged. Lars was gone now. Marta was done fitting in not just Thomas's blue lips, but the arithmetic of survival. She counted the cost of wood in a household Bible, $300 of firewood consumed in 1 bad year. Halvorsen's family wore heavy coats even at the breakfast table. The Pritchards lost cattle when their barn dropped below zero. Marta studied agricultural journals and ancient Norwegian farming texts. She discovered a secret: the earth itself remains warm at 4 feet down. The ground holds at 4 to 2 degrees. It is the difference between being frozen and not frozen. Use stone to bring deep earth warmth up through floors. Stone drinks in autumn warmth and releases it in January. Marta has drawn the complex design 12 times on paper. She researched every source and consulted a professor in Bozeman. The ambitious design requires labor beyond a single woman's strength. Digging 4 feet, laying stones, rubble, clay, and rebuilding floors. A thermal mass floor, flagstones in clay over stone battery. 4 tons of stone are required for the massive project. The town mason wants $60 for the heavy labor, $52 in a rusted coffee tin. Her total savings. Marta decides to undertake the Fortin task alone. Marta budgets 6 weeks, racing against the permanent mid-November freeze. She has 4 to 3 days. The digging takes 11 days of backbreaking, relentless, solitary physical labor. The soil is clay-heavy and dense, threaded with glacial cobblestones and debris. She works from first light until she cannot see, sharpening her pick repeatedly. Her hands blister, burst, and callous over in the space of a single week. Ingrid Purr and young Thomas help by hauling heavy buckets of soil away. They pass the soil through a removed north window to clear the cabin interior. The mounded soil outside grows into a low ridge that neighbors eye suspiciously. Mrs. Dunbar stops her horse to warn Marta about the cabin's structural integrity. Marta thanks her for the concern and immediately returns to her digging. Purr hits a layer of clay so hard it rings the pick like iron. Marta is 4 feet down now, the cabin rising to her chest. She presses her palms flat against the cold clay. For a minute she feels it, the absence of cold at 41 degrees, feeling the principle in her hands, is something else entirely. She stays with her palms against the clay. For a long time, the creek bed nearby is paved with flat limestone slabs. She and Purr haul stone for 3 days, bottoming the wagon. She sorts the largest slabs for the very bottom layer. Rubble and gravel go in last, tamped down with a fence post. She mixes clay, water, and straw to prevent the floor cracking. She spreads the clay 3 inches thick, then lets it cure. The flagstone surface is the final step. but a setback arrives she is 8 stones short of. Covering the northwest corner, she needs cut stone, but cannot afford the mason's price. She finds Lars's unused stone-cutting chisels under a rotting canvas. Using Lars's instructions, she practices. Cutting scrap stone for hours, by midnight, she is cutting flagstones passably flat and square. By the last week of October, the thermal floor is finished. She rebuilds it, relays the flagstones, fills the joints mortar mixed to the consistency of thick porridge, levels the surface with a board catching no boot toe. The stones are gray-blue limestone, cool to the touch. She crouches and presses her cheek to the floor, remembering the stove bench in her parents' house in Norway. The stone is cool, not the dead outside cold. She lights the fire, and she waits. The neighbors have not stopped watching Birgit. Halvorsen stops by with a pot of soup. She crouches, puts her hand flat on the stone. Birgit says, "It is warmer than the boards were." Marta says, "Not yet, give it 3 weeks." Birgit asks, "You are certain this will work?" Marta says, "I am certain the principle is sound. Whether my execution is sound, that I will know in February." Halvorsen stands in the doorway, eyeing the stone floor skeptically. "What happens when the fire goes out?" Marta Wood runs out. "My floor holds heat for 20 hours, yours holds 2. Eric leaves, pausing at his wagon before driving away silently. Early November brings a 17 below, cold snap. A warning preview. A thin crack opens in a central floor joint. Overnight, the mortar mix was wrong. Too much clay, not enough sand. She must repoint the joints before the floor heaves apart. She repoints the joints over 2 days using a sandier mix. She tests a trial patch overnight on a board outside. It holds. She systematically repacks every joint across the floor. Her knees ache from 2 days of kneeling on stone, but the floor holds, becoming a solid, unyielding thermal mass. Young Thomas stands barefoot on the stone in the evening. "Mama, the floor is warm," Thomas says with wonder. The stone has absorbed weeks of fire, holding heat deep. Marta watches Thomas and feels a rare moment of peace. She returns to stacking wood and filling the cellar. She banks sod 4 courses deep around the cabin foundation, sealing the structure against the air, stealing the earth's warmth. She weather strips doors with wool and hangs heavy window curtains. Marta is as ready as she is ever going to be on November 14th. The northwest sky turns the color of a bruise. Marta looks at the horizon, whispering to herself, "Here it comes." The storm arriving on November 15th, 1903, isn't the country's worst. Old-timers call it middle range, a deceptive Montana survival term. The temperature drops to 4 to 7 below zero before it stops falling. Northwest winds hit 50 miles an hour, burying outbuildings in drifts. 6-foot drifts fill the road between Halvorsen and the creek. Horizontal snow hides the Pritchard's barn, vanishing into the white. The storm rages for 61 hours before the wind finally drops. Skies clear, and temperatures fall to 51 below zero. By morning, Marta keeps the fire steady, charging the Fortin thermal mass. Thomas sleeps on the stone floor, waking up completely warm. Inside, it is 52 degrees. Outside, 4 to 7 below zero. A 9 to 9 degree difference exists between life and certain death. Marta looks at the thermometer, knowing her scientific principle is sound. She whispers to Lars, wishing he could see her victory across the valley. The neighbors are struggling to survive the cold. Marta cannot see her neighbors through the blizzard's white wall. She knows the architecture of Halvorsen's cabin. Standard single-wall construction. Heat bleeds out of the neighbors' logs like water through cheesecloth. Halvorsen's family survives by hanging heavy blankets over interior walls. The children will sleep in shifts near the fire's warmth. On the first night, the Pritchard brothers' barn loses its roof. They fight the 6-mile winds for hours with lanterns and rope. 6 cattle die of cold exposure before they can move. Both brothers suffer frostbite, and Hal loses 2 fingertips. Marta lets the fire burn down to coals, testing the thermal mass. Floor temperature drops slightly over 6 hours as the battery holds. She adds only 3 pieces of wood to recharge the stones. The thermal mass requires only modest fuel to sustain life. Marta records the success in her journal, a lifelong record. Thomas remains warm and asleep on the stone floor blanket. The blizzard ends on the 17th. With absolute total silence, Marta uses a knife to break the ice-sealed cabin door. The mid-40 below air burns her lungs with icy clarity. The world is a white, perfect, and silent frozen desert. Snow drifts reach the south window, burying the cabin foundation. Marta digs through the deep snow to reach the barn Having survived the assault, Marta stands and waits for news. Erik Halvorsen arrives that afternoon on skis, his brick-red face. Showing days of sleepless exhaustion, Marta meets him at the fence. Her broad-shouldered silhouette dark against the blinding white landscape. Without preamble, Erik asks for the interior temperature she maintained during the blizzard's peak. Marta reveals she held 52 degrees inside while it was 47 below zero outside. Erik admits his family barely reached 38 degrees, burning through cords of wood. Humbled, the neighbor asks to learn her secrets. Marta invites him inside to see. Erik stands in the cabin, removing a boot to test the stone floor's warmth. He stands barefoot on the limestone, encountering a truth he did not expect. Marta explains that the Earth's ancient heat is entirely natural and enduring. Birgit Halvorsen sends her boy with a letter after the storm. The letter asks Marta to explain her floor's unique construction. The Pritchard brothers inquire if the principle works for animals. Marta writes back, confirming it works even better for livestock. Animals provide heat that the stone mass absorbs and returns 3 weeks later. Mrs. Dunbar visits during a mild freeze. Children perform chores in shirt sleeves, defying the deep cold. Mrs. Dunbar apologizes, admitting they thought Marta had lost her mind. It has been done for 1,000 years. We simply forgot. Old knowledge never disappears. It waits in cedar boxes and journals. Marta's survival principle was memory, not a modern invention. Stone holds heat like a cast iron pot holds water. Survival in Montana means partnering with the warm ground below. 412 hours of labor for $41. That first winter, the floor saved $200 in wood. She added a second stone thermal bench along the north wall. Her cabin was warmer while burning less wood than anyone. The flagstone floor is still there, a solid testament to Marta's survival and ingenuity. Marta will die in that cabin in 1941, 76 years old. And at peace, Ingrid Solberg will live in the cabin for 20 years after her mother. Every person who enters remarks on the strange, particular warmth rising from the stones. It is a warmth older and more patient than a fire, radiating steadily. The earth holds the heat of the living world for 40 years, releasing warmth 1 degree at a time through every night. In every winter, Halvorsen rebuilt his cabin floor in the spring of 1904. He hired a mason for the stone cutting, which Marta thought reasonable. He used her design, corresponding with the professor, for specific modifications. Erik never exactly apologized for his words, but his respect was clear. He brought her elk meat every winter. An apology in frontier language. Cold teaches us that warmth is not just generated, it is stored. Warmth is gathered in good days and held against the bad. A fire is immediate, but a thermal mass is patient. The greatest skill is planning for the fire's inevitable absence, building warmth for when wood runs out. And children sleep. Marta carried this knowledge across oceans, continents, and great grief. She put it 4 feet down while the neighbors laughed. The stone floor did not care whether they laughed. Stone is patient in a way. Human dignity is not perhaps you have a wall built the right way or old knowledge others call foolish, techniques forgotten by most, an arithmetic that runs against the consensus of neighbors watching from the fence, saying it cannot work, that the dead are cold. Come back in February in the 4 to 7 below silence. After the storm, take off your boots, set your foot on the stone floor where children sleep. Feel what 4 feet of patient earth has held in the dark. Since October, it was always there. We simply stopped asking.